Activity Lab, and I help companies start businesses, and I start my own businesses. I've had the fortune, or probably I've been foolish enough to jump into the entrepreneurial and startup community over the last year. And so what I wanted to do is put together a panel for us to ask some questions about anybody out there who is getting their own business started and has the same questions that we all kind of work with on the organizational, legal, and financial regard. And so I want to start by having each of you introduce yourselves, and then we'll start into the questions and then open it up for you all to ask some questions as well.
Judy Ryan, owner of LifeWorks Systems.
Brian Rogers, owner of Blue Maven Law.
Lori St. Clair, owner of On Target for Profitable Growth.
Wonderful. So I put Judy first because, in my opinion, I think you have to have the right organizational framework first before you can get started putting it together. And so I really just wanted to ask, what are some of the things to consider when you're putting together a group of founders or a team of workers?
Okay, the first thing that I think most people overlook is the fact that you want to create conditions where people want to get engaged and want to be involved. And we tend to instead just jump in and start doing stuff. So the most important framework that I think you want to look at is, how would I create an environment where people aren't leaving by the dozens going, I can't wait to get out of this corporate environment. So making it important to set up the structures that basically allow you to create a certain kind of culture. Like, don't make it accidental how you create your culture. Make it really intentional. When we work with clients, we tell them we have a very biased opinion about how you should set up your culture. And that culture should be designed to transform people into people that are leaders, that are self-managing, know how to manage their own motivation, their relationships, their happiness, all of that kind of stuff. If you don't do that first, you're going to kind of go to default, which is usually mediocrity, discouragement. It can often slip into that. So accounting for that up front is very critical, I think, to success. Oh, sorry.
I'll keep peppering you with questions. No, that's okay. So one of the follow-up questions I have too is that a lot of people get into business on their own, and so they're a solopreneur, and other people are working on partnerships. What are some of the differences in just organizationally when you're doing things on your own as opposed to with one or maybe several people?
Love it. You have to create your own personal culture. You have to be able to say, what is it that I have my stake in the ground for, that when times get tough, I don't get knocked over by the tough times. So for me, it's always going back to my purpose. If my purpose is to create a world where people love their lives, even at work, am I loving my life at work? That's the thing that I come back to. If I'm being mean to somebody, I'm not loving my life. If I'm being irresponsible, I'm not loving my life. So in the face of a vacuum, you may not be living by purpose, so make sure that you live by purpose. So, because you are your own little culture, you are your own little company, even as a solopreneur.
Excellent. So following up on the organizational, we transition into some of the legal questions, which is one of the first areas that we need to dive into. What are some of the initial legal considerations that you need to account for when you're starting up a company?
Well, one thing that I find that people often don't pay enough attention to is exactly, what they're trying to do and who the players are and what their relationships are. From a legal perspective, I always want to know what are people's relationships. If you've got someone who's doing some work in a company, are they an owner? Are they an employee? If you've got someone who has contributed some money to the company, are they an owner? Are they a creditor? And that's a mistake that I see a lot of people not really pay attention to, and then 6 months, a year later, they don't know whether they've got partners or employees or creditors. And that can be dicey, to say the least, trying to figure that out. Up front, it's much easier to think about these things and get them straightened out. Once they're, people have investment of time and money and whatnot into an operation, and especially if things aren't as smooth as everyone had hoped, it can be much more difficult to iron those things out.
So I have one question that I want to ask you specifically. I'm currently working on several partnerships in organizations that I'm building, and a few of my colleagues have tried to start with the lowest cost option and putting together legal documents on our own. And so I wanted to kind of ask you, what are some of the pitfalls that you see with not using not using the correct people to make sure that you have it right from the beginning?
Yeah, I think Tom's presentation was interesting on this point. I mean, when you hire an attorney, what do you actually get? Documents are not what I provide as of most value. It's advice. And so if you go to LegalZoom or a non-attorney provider who basically by law can't offer legal advice, then what you're getting is a document without context and advice around that. Is this the most appropriate document for you or not? It may be or maybe not. Even if it's a high quality document, if it's the wrong one for you, you're not covered like you might think, and it could give you a false sense of security. That said, I really do think there's a lack of affordable attorneys in the small business space where economically, you're just not shocked at what the cost of some basic, legal advice is. That said, also there are a lot of lawyers who will talk to people, kind of an initial consultation for free, and so you can really get oriented through that kind of conversation. It might be 15 minutes, but it could be very, very valuable to you. And also, I know in my own firm, I've kind of unbundled the services so you don't, if you're buying or selling a business, it doesn't have to be absolutely everything that I can do for you, but in a short conversation can kind of help orient you to what's going on and make sure that you don't make really big mistakes.
So we've covered organizational and legal. I wanted to get a perspective on the financial side of things. One of the things I see, especially with the beginnings of new organizations, is there's receipts all over the place and everybody's trying to account for what we've bought, and you've got to get notepads and rent and all these different things. What are some of the habits that people can establish from the beginning to make sure that those things run a little bit more smooth?
So one of the things I see a lot with those types of expenses that are incurred as you're just researching and you're developing is there's no tracking whatsoever of any of it. And I've had conversations with clients and potential clients who, the words have come out that, well, I didn't have my bank account established yet, so I didn't pay attention to those expenses. I just paid those out of pocket. Or, I didn't have a credit card established yet, so that was just my personal expense. And they don't realize that all of those expenses that you're incurring are business expenses. So even if you don't have your bank account established yet, even if you don't have a business credit card established yet, you should be tracking all of those receipts. So for the time that you develop this concept and begin researching and working towards it, at a minimum, grab a file folder and start dumping all of those receipts in. At an absolute minimum, that's what you should start with, is just making sure you're keeping track of all that, regardless of the payment source, whether that comes from your mattress money, whether that comes from your IRA, your bank account, wherever. That's what you need. You need to make sure you're tracking it from day one. And I highly encourage talking with a tax accountant to really understand how you've structured your business and what impacts different purchases are going to make.
So I want to ask one quick selfish question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience for you guys to ask any questions you may have. I struggle with QuickBooks. I've tried it a couple of times, and I just think I need a Rosetta Stone to help me learn how to use QuickBooks. Do you know of any alternatives to QuickBooks, whether it's just an Excel sheet or something along those lines?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to track your expenses. I will say, you can go as simple as, a pad of paper and making a list. You can use Excel. I recommend an accounting software because that's where you're going to get double checking of what you've entered. Excel is not going to provide that very easily. It's not going to show you easily what outstanding checks and things like that you have. You're going to have to go through your big, long register list, to find that. So I do recommend QuickBooks as one of the number one softwares that I use. I think it's very user-friendly. However, I do believe they oversell the simplicity of anyone just picking up the box off the shelf and being able to set it up. There is accounting background needed to understand how you're mapping certain accounts and certain transactions in there. There are lots of other softwares as well. Xero is one of them. It's a neat way. They've got it's online software, and they've got the capability where you can scan a receipt right there, upload it to your Xero account, and then you can, enter transactions based on those uploaded documents. So there are a lot of other softwares out there as well. I could spend all day naming, all the different varieties out there. But regardless of what software you get, I think you will find the same concepts apply. You need to have someone come in and help you understand the basics of what you are accounting for, what chart of accounts makes the most sense for you, and make sure that you're mapping everything and using it properly from the beginning. So I highly encourage, no matter what software you use, talk to an accountant or a bookkeeper to get established with how you need to be tracking for your business, so the time you invest in it is used wisely, and you're not just entering information that your tax accountant at your end is going to look at and go, yeah, we can't use these reports, they don't make sense. So invest up front with some knowledge and information on how to do it properly from that point forward.
I just want to mention 3 things that some people don't know about QuickBooks. There's a way to integrate QuickBooks with your bank so you don't have to enter any of your transactions manually. So that's a big time saver. Another one is that there's an online QuickBook version that will automatically track your miles. It'll tell you started here and you went 13 miles to this place, which allows you to start saying, I'm going to track all my mileage more effectively. And it also allows you to, I'm trying to think of the third thing now. It allows you to scan your receipts so that if you're not good at saving them, or they end up fading out over time, a lot of times that happens, that you can scan them in, then you can even throw them away. I don't know, probably not, but anyway.
That's great. So I do want to give you guys all an opportunity to ask the panel some questions. Please let us know who you want to speak to, or the entire panel. Of course, we have Judy, Brian, and Lori.
Just a comment. I've developed a 3-page list of questions and things to talk about when you're going into business with somebody else, because talking about things up front is so important that I'd be glad to share with you. If you just give me your card, I'll email that to you. It is not legal advice. I want to be very clear about that. It's just what I've observed as a tax accountant.
This is a question for Lori. Have you heard of the app called Expensify, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yes, I have heard of it. However, I'm not super familiar with it, so I really couldn't comment on it in detail. But I have heard of it, and I've heard that a lot of people have used it successfully.
We've used that, so I can meet you afterwards. We use that today.
Great.
I would like to add just a side note to Andy's comment as far as the difference between the solopreneur and the partnership. From a bookkeeping and accounting perspective, sometimes a solopreneur can be a lot more, if they're just taxed as a sole proprietor, you can be a little bit more lackadaisical with how you're tracking things. That's typically what I see. But as soon as you move into a partnership, you need to make sure you've got everything on point, because it makes such a huge difference of what goes in, what goes out, and whose money is contributing or being drawn out of the company. Correct. Any of the others. So it's important no matter what, but especially when you come into those situations.
We have time for one more question.
I'd just like to reiterate what Judy was talking about there, because if you want an example of how important it is to have the real solid culture and be true to it, all you have to do is look at what Bill Burnett has done here with E4E. Bill recruited partners on the basis of the values that he possessed, and it's the congruency of values among the E4E partners and now subscribers that are coming on board that have made this organization so successful and allow us to continue to grow.
Perfect final comment. Thank you all. Thank you, panel.